Good afternoon. I welcome all foreign ministries to a regular briefing. We have Russian foreign correspondents with us. We start with the schedule of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Today, the third meeting of the Interdepartmental Commission on Caspian Cooperation will be held in the Foreign Ministry building, under the chairmanship of the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, which will be attended by the heads of relevant Russian ministries and departments of three Russian coastal regions: the Astrakhan region, the Republic of Dagestan, and the Republic of Kalmykia, as well as representatives of the Federal Assembly of our country. During the event, it is planned to discuss a wide range of issues related to the implementation of Russian national interests in the Caspian Sea region, as well as prospects for the development and deepening of Caspian cooperation. On November 21-22, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will pay a working visit to Brest, the Republic of Belarus, to participate in a joint meeting of the board of the Russian and Belarusian foreign ministries. Let me remind you that such meetings have been held annually since the 2000th year. They are an effective mechanism for synchronizing the efforts of the two countries in the international arena. Within the framework of the upcoming event, coordination of approaches to cooperation with the countries of the world majority and in multilateral formats will continue, with emphasis on the Zakharova Cooperation Organization, as well as joint efforts to counter the judicial and sanctions aggression of the collective West. As a result, a corresponding resolution will be adopted. The plan of Meshmedov consultations for the next 25th year has been approved. It is also planned that the ministers will sign a joint statement on the common vision of the Eurasian Charter of Diversity and Multipolarity in the 21st century, as well as a bilateral declaration on enhancing the role of international law and on guiding principles regarding the qualification of unilateral coercive measures as illegal ways and means of countering, mitigating, and compensating for the negative consequences of such measures. The program of the visit of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov provides for a meeting with his Belarusian counterpart to exchange views on topical issues of bilateral relations, cooperation, the international agenda, as well as foreign policy coordination on multilateral platforms. And special attention will be paid to the topic of diplomatic support of integration processes within the Union State, including the preparation of the meeting of the Supreme State Council of the Union State, scheduled for early December of this year, which is timed to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty on the Creation of the Union State 1999th year. As part of the visit of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, it is planned to visit the Brest Hero Fortress Memorial Complex, attach flowers to the monument of its defender, who were the first to take the blow of the Nazi invaders, and those heroes who for several generations of our citizens have become an example of courage, perseverance, and self-sacrifice in the name of defending the common fatherland. On November 25th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold a traditional meeting with participants of the annual scientific and educational program of the Gorchakov Public Diplomacy Support Foundation Dialogue for the Future. Within the framework of this discussion platform, young experts from Russia and foreign countries conduct an open exchange of views on various aspects of international relations. The current program of the foundation is devoted to the role of BRICS, SCO, other institutions, the formation of a multipolar world, and the participants will be more than 40 representatives of public policy circles from both CIS countries and far abroad. At a meeting with the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, they plan to discuss topical issues of world politics and the situation in certain regions. And of course, this dialogue will be interactive. They will receive appropriate answers to their questions, and there will be an interesting discussion. In fact, as always, on November 26th, the 43rd meeting of the Council of Heads of Constituent Entities of the Russian Federation under the Ministry on Agrarian Diplomacy in the Regions will be held at the mansion of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, under the chairmanship of the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov. It will be attended by governors, senior officials of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation, federal executive authorities, and during the event, it is planned to discuss issues of increasing the contribution of regions to strengthening Russia's position in the global agricultural market, strengthening the role of our country in close cooperation with BRICS partners as one of the guarantors of food security in the world. In addition, it is planned to hold several hours on the issues of resettlement to Russia of citizens from unfriendly states, with unfriendly regimes in the context of the implementation of Presidential Decree No. 702 of the 19th of August this year on the provision of humanitarian support to persons who share traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. It is intended to review the positive experience accumulated in a number of regions in the reception and adaptation of displaced persons, as well as to outline a number of measures, primarily informational, legal, organizational, in order to establish systematic work on the implementation of the aforementioned decree. On November 28th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will take part in a joint meeting of the Council of Foreign Ministers, the Council of Defense Ministers, and the Committee of Secretaries of the STO Security Council. The event will be held under the chairmanship of the Kazakh side in Astana, before the scheduled regular session of the STO Collective Security Council on the same day. It provides for an exchange of views on the military-political situation in the regions of collective security, discussion of the results of cooperation within the framework of the STO, prospects for further development of the collective security system. Special attention will be paid to the preparation for the joint celebration of the 80th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War of the 41st-45th years. It is planned that the Kyrgyz Republic will inform about the priorities of its chairmanship in the organization in the next 25th year. It is expected that a number of documents will be approved during the meeting, which will be submitted to the STO Collective Security Council for consideration, as well as decisions aimed at further strengthening allied ties, increasing foreign policy coordination, improving crisis response procedures in the STO, and equipping its collective forces. And in the development of this topic, I would like to say that on November 18th, during the 79th session of the UN General Assembly, a resolution on cooperation between the UN and the STO was adopted. The document notes that the potential of this organization allows to adequately respond to a wide range of challenges and threats. In the area of responsibility of the organization, the practical efforts of the member states to counter terrorism, organized transnational crime, drug trafficking, illegal migration, and to eliminate the consequences of natural and man-made disasters were highly appreciated. The significant contribution of the STO to the development of peacekeeping potential, strengthening the system of regional security and stability is emphasized separately. Member organizations are recommended to continue exploring possible ways to further increase cooperation in the field of peacekeeping. The STO, for its part, is ready to join peacekeeping operations under the auspices of the UN. The General Assembly welcomes the efforts of the UN and STO secretariats to coordinate and cooperate in areas of mutual interest, and also invites the Secretary-General of the United Nations to continue to hold regular consultations with the STO Secretary-General. A separate delegation once again tried, well, as they always do, politicizing the situation around the adoption of the resolution. This document, which was usually adopted by consensus, was put to a vote, the results of which in fact demonstrated the rejection of such opportunistic games and support for efforts to further expand ties between the UN and the STO, which, let me remind you, on December 2nd will mark the 20th anniversary of obtaining observer status of the UN General Assembly. We will continue to contribute to the sustainable development of partnership between the two organizations. Now we turn to the current international agenda, the situation around the Ukrainian crisis. Tonight, on November 21st, an attempt by the Kyiv regime to carry out a terrorist attack using aircraft-type drones on objects on the territory of the Russian Federation was stopped. According to the Ministry of Defense of our country, 2 Ukrainian drones were intercepted and destroyed over the territories of the Rostov and Volgograd regions by air defense on duty. But we will talk more today about the terrorist activity of the Kyiv regime and its sponsors. Let's start with what were the prerequisites for the general monstrous aggravation of the situation in this region. 20 years ago, let me remind you, exactly on November 21st, 2004, the so-called Orange Revolution began in Kyiv. She, in fact, laid the foundations. She contributed to the processes that began further. On the one hand, it can be said to have laid the foundations. On the other hand, it led to a split. It seems to be an oxymoron, but let's see how events unfolded. This split in Ukrainian society really detonated after those events. They demonstrated, this situation, the presence of different views on the future of their country among the population in Ukraine. In fact, it was a rehearsal for the bloody putsch of February 2000 of the 14th year. Ukraine, it was preceded by street protests, as it were, organized by the opposition. On November 21st, too, of the 13th year, because of disagreement with the decision of President Yanukovych to postpone the signing of the association agreement for a few months, because of Ukraine's obligations under the free trade agreement in the CIS. Why, as it were, protests? Why, as it were, the opposition? Because in reality, these were well orchestrated and very well-paid mass riots from the outside, with the aim of overthrowing the legitimate government. Literally from the first days of the so-called Euromaidan, it was clear that we were talking about another color revolution, the beloved brainchild of the United States, Britain, and all of their, so to speak, NATO allies. The West and the Ukrainian radical nationalists acted rudely, cynically, according to the principle of who is not with us, is against us, and at stake was the task of subjugating the Ukrainian elites in order to literally siphon resources from Ukraine, turning it into a hotbed of instability and a springboard for attacking Russia, and destabilizing the situation in the region as a whole. Well, now we see that in the world. Let me remind you once again of the dates I mentioned. On November 21st, 2004, the Pomerantyev Revolution, as they say, began. On November 21st of the 13th year, street protests were organized and paid for, which then resulted in an unconstitutional coup in the 14th year, with further civil confrontation. But these dates were not noticed in the West and will not be noticed. Another anniversary is being celebrated there. Kyiv and the West have made a lot of efforts to celebrate the 19th of November. 1,000 days or 1,000th day, as it was said there, is the beginning of the formulated name of Russian aggression. Classic a classic story for the West. Not to see the root causes, origins, and prerequisites. Focus on the right convenient formulation for yourself. And then, so to speak, to hold the event according to plan. Not everything went according to plan. Who was into what a lot? For example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria agreed to the fact that they celebrated the 19th of November of the millennium. How was the formulation of Russian aggression? Well, in general, so to speak, something didn't work out with the orchestra. Zeal was enough only for another provocation. On the same day, with the strikes of the VSO with long-range American missiles attacks on the object of the Bryansk region, according to the Ministry of Defense, 5 missiles were shot down, 1 missile was damaged. If there really are regular chroniclers in Kyiv, we would like to remind them of a number of sad dates that should be included in their historical tablets. November 17th. It was 380. 303,870th day since the entry into force of the decree of the 14th of April 2000 of the 14th year on the anti-terrorist operation in the southeast of Ukraine. What kind of date is this? This is exactly the date of the beginning of the civil war by the Kiev regime, Kiev, against its own civilian population, the population of Donbass, who stood up for their legitimate rights, language, culture, historical memory of their ancestors, and, crucially, stood up for the legitimate authorities who wanted to destroy Bankova and therefore sent troops there, being themselves the protégés of the West, which, with its own money, carried out a coup d'état in Ukraine. There is another date, on November 20th, 303,855 days ago, on May 2nd, 2014. The Ukrainian Nazis committed a monstrous crime in the Odessa House of Trade Unions. There, with particular cruelty, they dealt with those who did not support the bloody unconstitutional armed coup in Kyiv, who did not agree with the coming to power in Ukraine of national radicals and their anti-people policies. Then, almost 50 people were killed in the fires, and at the hands of Bandera, several hundred were injured. And actually, another date, which was also not noticed in the West. It really doesn't have such a record yet. It literally happened on the eve of the 19th of November, when the whole West celebrated who the 1000th day and who the millennia of alleged Russian aggression. November 17th, in the Kursk region, as a result of the use of a Ukrainian drone on a passenger car, the editor-in-chief of the regional People's newspaper, Yulia Kuznetsova, was killed. She took out the archive files of the editorial office. She planned to tell about the situation in the Russian border area in her material, A New Material. She died. The cameraman accompanying her was injured. A police precinct officer was wounded. We have commented on this in detail. A criminal case has been opened on the fact of a terrorist attack. No one in the West noticed it. He didn't say a word. Nobody wrote a line. There is another date, November 20th. Exactly 6 months have passed since the expiration of Zelensky's presidential term. No one in Kiev or in the West paid attention to this and the above dates. They didn't remember. But the leader of the Kiev regime continues to give criminal orders that lead to widespread chaos, the death of innocent people. But the West sees nothing of this. Now directly about terrorist activities. I have already talked about some aspects today. New data, new circumstances. The Kiev regime continues its terror against the civilian population of Russia, subjecting civilian objects to daily shelling and drone attacks. From the 13th to the 21st of November, more than 530 Ukrainian drones were intercepted and destroyed over 9 Russian regions. During the same period, in the Belgorod region, 423 ammunition was fired at elderly homes by the Ukranazis, and attacks were carried out with the help of 289 unmanned aerial vehicles. This is where the data doesn't account for tonight's attack. 2 people died during the mentioned period without taking into account. I want to say again that this is data up to the 21st of November. 2 people were killed and 37 were injured. The number of explosive devices dropped from drones on civilian objects, including passenger vehicles, has increased. On November 18th, the WAVs of the Armed Forces of Ukraine attacked a regular bus on the Nikolskoye-Zori highway. There are victims. On the night of November 20th, Bandera used several drones to attack a food processing plant located in the village of Alexievka. One of the workshops and the power line were damaged. On the 12th-15th of November, residential areas of Gorlovka DPI were hit by regular shelling, including with the use of cluster-type shells. 24 people were injured. On November 18th, a drone struck a minibus taxi, injuring 10 people. November 19th, as a result of drone attacks, 5 civilians were injured, including a teenager born in 2007 year. The shelling of the Energodar of the Zaporozhye region does not stop. As a result of another attack on the 13th of November on the residential sector of the city, a civilian was killed. All those involved in these and other atrocities of the Kyiv regime will certainly answer to the full extent of the law. And now about justice. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and foreign mercenaries for war crimes. The Investigative Committee of Russia has opened a criminal case in connection with the fact of desecration, damage to the monument to Soviet soldiers who died during the Great Patriotic War in the village of Kazachie Lochnia, under the court of the Kursk region. Lithuanian neo-Nazi Valdos Bartikaevich, we have already talked about this, who invaded Russian territory as part of a unit of the armed forces of Ukraine. This was done. This anti-hero likes to publicly brag about his exploits, as it became known to the media. He is not only such, a moral monster, who mocks the memory of the fallen, but also an ordinary thief and looter, who participated in a raid on shops and residential buildings in Sudza in March. Let me remind you, this year, Valdas Bortkovics was noted for bringing a bucket of excrement to an improvised memorial arranged by the residents of Vilnius, in memory of the victim of the act, in the Crocus City Hall, near the Russian embassy in Lithuania. The criminal is on the international wanted list. On November 13th, he is already serving a 20-year, 22-year prison sentence for murder and attempted murder of civilians. The driver of the machine gun squad of a separate special-purpose detachment Azov, banned here, Shvets, was sentenced to 26 years in prison in another criminal case for the murder of a civilian in Mariupol in March of the 22nd year. In the case of the invasion of the Bryansk region in March of the 23rd, the leader of the terrorist organization Russian Volunteer Corps Kapustin, and 4 other participants Kanikin, Galinov, Zyryanov, Ogurtsev were sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. Their guilt was also proved in the shooting of 2 civilian cars, which resulted in the death of 2 people and injuries to an adult man and a 10-year-old child. The criminals have been put on the international wanted list. Ukrainian neo-Nazis, a former commander of the Deeper Shilov paramilitary formation, were sentenced to 9 years in prison in absentia. He made public statements in which he called for the killing of Russian citizens and also provided false information about the alleged illegal actions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in Bucha and Gastomel. A criminal case has been opened on the fact of damage to the APU as a result of shelling in mid-November of the cultural heritage object of the Dmitrievskaya Church in the village of Kazachie Lochnia of the Sejensky district of the Kursk region. According to the investigative committee, more than 5,500 criminal cases have been initiated since the 2014 year on crimes committed by the armed formations of Ukraine. 450 sentences have been handed down. 800 decisions on the involvement of defendants have been approved, and the investigation of about 70 cases against foreign mercenaries has been completed. Ukrainian militants have caused damage to Russian regions in the amount of about 60 billion rubles. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to work to bring to justice Ukrainists, foreign mercenaries, for military and other crimes. And now about Zelensky's plans. This is a separate page in a textbook on psychiatry. Against the background of significant losses of the armed forces of Ukraine, increasing demoralization in the ranks of the Ukrainists, Zelensky announced his new project in the Verkhovna Rada on November 19th, but apparently also under the date. Now it's a resilience plan. As we remember, there was a plan for peace, a plan for victory, that is, for the Kyiv regime of trouble. There was now a plan for perseverance. It consists of 10 items and several appendices. Its detailed announcement, or its detailed presentation, should take place in December. Few people understand what we are talking about, but everyone understands one thing. that this is another set of painful fantasies in order to ensure self-preservation in the power of Zelensky, who has lost legitimacy. Yes, as a matter of fact, it seems to me that he does not hide it himself. Here he is in parliament there, saying that there will be no elections in Ukraine until the end of the war. A direct quote about the Constitution of Ukraine and the legislation does not allow elections to be held in wartime, and no one in the world does not demand this from Ukraine, and this is disastrous for the country, stated this very Nazi Napoleon. We perfectly understand what it is about. On Bankova, they understand their own anti-ratings, do not realize the possibility of a military coup because of failures at the front, because of the growing and simply fatigue in Ukraine from the war. From the literal epiphany of the citizens of Ukraine, what was done to them, and from what cliff they were thrown off. In response to such challenges, problems, Zelensky is ready to further tighten the screws inside the country, which will obviously be handled by the so-called Ministry of Unification of Ukraine. Also, apparently, another, so to speak, unhealthy fantasy. Zelensky proposed to create such a structure, announcing the mentioned plan of the Ministry of Unification of Ukraine. Well, this is probably the same department that will unite Ukraine, in which Zelensky finished off all citizens. It is already clear today that whatever the content of the mentioned, as it was said there, the plan of resistance, it is clearly aimed at further mobilizing Ukraine's resources for the sake of continuing hostilities and inflicting a military defeat on Russia, of the goal that the West has set for the Kyiv regime. As noted by the British edition of Time, Zelensky, putting forward a new plan of resilience, wants to lower the degree of despair in Kyiv because of Trump's re-election as president, to assure citizens that he can save the country, given the prospect of a possible termination of American aid. And now, as a matter of fact, what plans really work? On November 13th, at a meeting of the Association of Ukrainian Cities appointed by the Kyiv regime, the so-called mayor of Mariupol, Boychenko, according to media reports, was forced to admit the fact of the rapid return of Mariupol to this Russian city of previously abandoned residents. Of course, he tried in every possible way to distort the causal relationship of their outcomes with Ukraine. He made up all sorts of tall tales, avoided calling things by their proper names. Mariupol residents who fled from the fighting turned out to be, what can we hide here, simply do not need their former country, which did not even provide them with basic living conditions. In fact, they understand that they have never been considered people in Ukraine. Yes, this is, strictly speaking, a common phenomenon in Ukraine, but Boychenko was afraid to say the main reason for the return of Mariupol residents home. This is the restoration of the city. His rapid return to a peaceful life. This is the plan. These are the plans that work. Plans of our country. Today, in the Russian Mariupol, as well as in other regions reunited with Russia, housing, medical, social, educational, sports, cultural, and leisure facilities are being built at a high pace. Churches are being restored, memorials and parks are being landscaped. The work of transport has been adjusted, energy supply is provided. 45,500 square meters of Mariupol roads alone have been repaired this year. Think about it. This is almost 40% more than last year. And against this background, attention was drawn to the messages that appeared on Ukrainian social networks about the refusal of the French company Neo-Echo to continue the project to restore buildings destroyed during the fighting in the city of 100 miles in the Kyiv region. Why is that? Because the local authorities demanded that foreign partners transfer 20 million euros to the account for allegedly self-management of the project. But where in reality these funds will go, the French may not guess, although, as a matter of fact, it seems to me that they are already beginning to understand something, since they refuse to implement the proposals of the Kyiv regime and local authorities. But we understand perfectly well where all this will be stolen in Ukraine in the conditions of off-scale corruption in this country. The answer is obvious. And a few words about Washington's attempts to provide the remaining military assistance to the Kyiv regime. The Pentagon is hastily trying to transfer the remaining amount of American military aid to the Kyiv regime before the inauguration of the US president. At the same time, these volumes are increasing every day in some fabulous way. Just 2 weeks ago, the White House was talking about $6 billion. Then this amount increased to $7 billion. On November 12, Pentagon Press Secretary Ryder said that now we are talking about as many as $0.3 billion, from which $4 and $3 billion are planned within the current fiscal year, so to speak. $2 and $8 billion were returned as a result of recalculation. Fifth, the license of the TV channel was revoked. Its broadcasting was suspended, let me remind you, more than a year ago. On November 18th, 9 TV channels were fined for allegedly violating the coverage of the recent presidential elections in Moldova and this alleged European referendum, which ended in total falsification. But in fact, all this was done because these channels had the temerity to criticize the country's leadership, to provide airwaves to opposition politicians. In total, 14 TV channels have been closed in Moldova since 2022 year. More than 60 internet resources have been blocked. This is about what kind of Russian propaganda inside Moldova, it says at all, still cleaned up. Secondly, the second discrepancy, as noted, with its incompetent decisions, the Moldovan leadership itself, without any outside help, discredited itself, both in the eyes of the country's citizens and in front of Western sponsors. Disastrous decisions for the country continue to be taken and implemented against the background of the split of Moldovan society and the catastrophic state of the socio-economic sphere. The authorities have revised the budget for the 24th year, increasing defense spending by 0.5% and reducing allocations for the social sphere by 3.7%. Well, what does Russian propaganda have to do with it? Chizano is officially doing this. I will give you other facts now, but there is a third discrepancy. This is from me personally. Here Popshoy said that they were being told that they would supposedly never be in Europe, and so on. He was sad. I do not know how you are, of course, Mr. Popshoy. You studied geography at school. Moldova, long ago in Europe. The forcible imposition of a neoliberal agenda in this country is in full swing. This is in order to cloud the brains, in order to tell the population, who are already Europeans, that their future is in a certain Europe, where they just need to come. Yes, you are already Moldovan citizens, Europeans. You are already in Europe. You have proved with your work from your history that you have made a tremendous contribution to European civilization. Who are you listening to? Those who tell you about some mythical Europe where you just need to walk or come. You're already there. The main thing is that you are not made into the backyards of this Europe. Look, these new liberal narratives, as it is now customary in the West to say, are being planted. This is despite the fact that about 80% of Moldovans are in favor of traditional values. On November 12th, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance published a report in which Chizano is recommended to work on. It is impossible to say an honest word at all over the expansion of the LGBT agenda, but Moldova has no other problems. Let me remind you that the movement is recognized as extremist in Russia. Its activities are prohibited on the territory of the country. We are talking in particular about the formation of a legislative framework that provides same-sex couples with the opportunity to recognize and protect their relationship. Experts have no doubt that the Moldovan authorities will not hesitate to introduce this kind of innovation, which is destructive for Moldovan society. Despite the fact that the majority of Moldovans oppose rapprochement with NATO, the country's leadership continues to pull the republic towards the alliance as a priority. The preservation of the status of a trusted partner of the alliance is called. What did Alien entrust to Moldova? Just wondering, Russophobia? What else? In practice, as political scientists note, this means the forced transformation of the country into a logistics base for supplying the armed forces. Information is circulating in the media about the plans of the European Union to allocate over 30 million euros within the framework of the European Union-Ukraine Solidarity Corridors project for the overhaul of part of the railway network and Moldova to unload existing communication routes with Ukraine. As you understand, this is not being done for the purpose of, I don't know, improving the security situation or food security, in order to continue the escalation of the situation in the region. Against this background, the Moldovan public was concerned about the publication last week on the website of the Moldovan government of a draft resolution on the exchange of human organs and cells intended for transplantation. Between whom and whom, between which states the Moldovan authorities will change. Between the Republic of Moldova and other states. I would like to remind you that in the 22nd year, Moldova joined the European database of Eurotransplant bodies. And in this regard, many political scientists, journalists, public figures draw parallels with Ukraine, where the human organ trafficking industry has reached an unprecedented scale. We have repeatedly told about black transplantology in Ukraine during briefings. We will definitely duplicate more links to these materials. Do we need Moldovan organs now? Do you know why? Well, let's think about it. Are there any options? Yes, because Ukrainians may no longer remain on these very bodies. Zelensky finishes them off with Western money. And give the blooming garden that very golden billion organs, of course. And now they found a new victim. and what is needed in order, so to speak, to start a massive supply of these very organs from the territory of Moldova. Let's think again. Guess what? Of course, it is necessary to unleash a conflict there from the point of view of the West. It is necessary to make sure that somewhere the escalation reaches the level of hostilities, and as it was done on the territory of Ukraine, in the same way these bodies will be seized uncontrollably, as it was, I repeat, introduced by Zelensky. It's a scary story, but it repeats itself. The same thing was done in the Balkans. Do you remember when even Western figures could not stand it and told about what was going on in black transplantology, at a time when, again, the West was trying to dismember Yugoslavia? Well, now, concluding the topic of the situation in Moldova, I just want to say that this is all done consciously by the hands of those who call themselves Moldovan politicians, leaders, while having Romanian passports. All this is done under the guise of the so-called European project. This has nothing to do with Russian propaganda, nothing at all. It is not necessary to accuse our country of spreading malicious so-called narratives. There are simply no factual grounds for this. Yes, we know that this story is also imposed by the West to accuse our country of everything. But we will fight back. We will, time after time, patiently, with facts on hand, disavow all these lies. Moldovan citizens do not believe in these things that are imposed on them because they know who really poses a threat to their country and who is their friend. Here is an important date, the 25th of November. A professional holiday of servicemen of the peacekeeping forces of the Russian Federation will be celebrated in our country. It was on this day in 1973 that the Soviet Union for the first time sent the Second Emergency Armed Forces of the United Nations 36 military observers to ensure the implementation of the ceasefire between Egypt and Israel following the Yom Kippur War. Since then, the participation of Russian peacekeepers in background operations has become an established practice, and Russia is currently participating in 7 peacekeeping operations from Western Sahara and South Sudan to the Middle East and Cyprus. 86 Russians from among the military and police forces are involved in them. The activity of the Russian Blue Helmets has always been highly appreciated by the UN-Secretariat and visibly contributes to strengthening the authority of our country in the international arena. Russia is one of the top 10 countries that pay the budget and peacekeeping operations. On the basis of our training centers, high-quality training of both Russian and foreign peacekeepers is conducted, according to programs certified by the UN-Secretariat. In October of the 23rd year, Moscow was visited by specialists of the World Organization, who issued a certificate of compliance with the UN requirements, the Russian Staff Officers Training Course for the needs of the UN mission. On the basis of the Combined Arms Academy of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation in Narofominsk, earlier in the 21st year, in October of the 21st year, the UN Military Observers Training Course successfully passed a similar certification. In addition, annual courses are organized on the basis of the Peacekeeper Training Center of the All-Russian Institute of Advanced Training of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia in Domodedovo to obtain police officers and train police officers as part of the peacekeeping operation. Cooperation in the field of peacekeeping is one of the priorities of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Within the framework of the STO, peacekeeping forces and national contingents operate on a permanent basis, to which employees and employees of all member states of this structure are allocated. At the same time, it is especially honorable for us that the backbone of the STO peacekeepers are representatives of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The STO peacekeeping forces demonstrated their effectiveness, ability to help stabilize the situation in a short time, and stop the spread of chaos in practice during a joint operation conducted in January of the 22nd year. At the request of the Kazakh authorities, based on this experience, the organization adopted updated crisis response mechanisms at the highest level. The annual holding of the Inviolable Brotherhood exercises is aimed at increasing the combat capability and coherence of the STO peacekeeping forces. The next stage took place this year on the territory of Kazakhstan with the participation of more than 2,000 servicemen. More than 500 units of military equipment were involved. Representatives of the Russian armed forces actively shared with the Allies the experience that was gained during a special military operation. International observers are regularly invited to the exercises and to train peacekeepers according to unified programs. The STO effectively operates a corresponding center on the basis of the Military Training and Research Center of the Ground Forces of the Combined Arms, Order of Zhukov Academy of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. The training is conducted, among other things, taking into account the criteria and requirements of the United Nations, in the interests of the subsequent possible participation of STO peacekeepers in unpeacekeeping operations. The contribution of the STO to the cause of unpeacekeeping is noted in the resolution on cooperation between the UN and the STO, already mentioned today by the General Assembly, adopted on November 18th. Here we have noticed another fantastic one. I don't even know what to call it. This is not just a fake. This is a fake of such a state level. We are talking about the odious statements of the acting Federal Chancellor of Austria, Karl Nehammer, during an emergency press conference on November 15th. It was dedicated to the termination of Russian gas supplies to the Austrian energy concern OMV. The head of the Austrian government did not skimp on accusations, as always groundless, against our country. He claimed that in Vienna, direct quote, they would not allow themselves to be blackmailed and would not allow themselves to be brought to their knees, allegedly despite the stoppage of Russian gas supplies. Austria would continue to provide assistance the Kyiv regime. You know, I want to remind you of the facts. I want to say something in general that I think is widely known, but suddenly someone forgot, including in Austria. Gazprom Export has notified OMV of the termination of deliveries from November 16th. This was preceded by the verdict rendered in favor of the Austrian concern in the framework of arbitration proceedings, with the Russian side on the claim given in January of the 23rd year, regarding allegedly not up to the deliveries of gas in the autumn of the 22nd year, the volumes of which were supposed to go further to Germany. The claim of the Austrians was to reduce the pumping of gas in September of the 22nd year. The concern planned to recover the awarded amount. It was awarded by the court in the amount of 230 million euros on account of payments under the current long-term contract with Gazprom. And in this regard, I would like to put all the dots over and, as is known, the decrease in gas pumping in September of the 22nd year was due to objective reasons: the undermining of the Nord Stream gas pipeline and the stopping of transit through Poland via the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline. However, these two important factors, unsurprisingly, were ignored by the concern and the arbitrators. The Austrian side is well aware of the provision of the decree of the President of the Russian Federation of March 31st, 22nd year, number 172, on the special procedure for the fulfillment by foreign buyers of obligations to Russian suppliers of natural gas. It clearly spelled out the mechanism for paying for the supply of Russian pipeline gas to unfriendly countries, 4 rubles, which Vienna has so far regularly observed. It excludes further sale of natural gas if the payment deadline has come and payment has not been made to foreign buyers. The execution of the court decision on the reimbursement of the funds awarded to the OMV, the account of payments under another contract, would inevitably entail the non-implementation of further money transfers, and, as a result, the free selection of Russian pipeline gas. This is unfair behavior of the Austrian concern. Our negative reaction to this, it seems to me, is more than justified. We are not going to do charity work in this case. Now, oh yes, fantastic news has also come from Sweden. I think that everyone has paid attention to the noise that has risen in the media space in connection with the rupture of two communication cables at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The authorities of Germany and Finland reacted instantly and announced the likelihood of sabotage by a certain foreign state as part of its hybrid war. End quote. Maybe they are talking about the United States of America. The Swedish competent authorities declare, direct quote, the high priority of the ongoing investigation, and so far refrain from commenting. It would seem that it is worth rejoicing at this prudence of the Swedish authorities, but no. For them, local Russophobes are working out, who shout from literally all sources, that Russia is behind the damage to the communication cables of highly like. And the most amazing thing about these very fabrications is that she does it with the help of ships sailing under Chinese flags. End quote. This is from one such Russophobic material. Do you think Swedish Russophobes are lonely? No, of course not. Heavy Artillery pulled up. German edition of Bild. It has published an article claiming that a certain Chinese cargo ship with a Russian captain is to blame for everything. Oh, what a multipass. Both Russia and China, so to speak, are to blame here. They immediately recalled the cases a year ago when the Hong Kong registered vessel of the Nurse Paul B damaged the Finnish-German Baltic connector gas pipeline with an anchor. At the same time, Moscow's hand was also sought in this, you remember. True, they didn't find anything, but they forgot to tell about it. I think this story is about the same thing. We expect that the Russian-Chinese hysteria raised by these professional Russophobes, so to speak, will settle down. I would also like to hope that the investigation will be brought to an end, unlike the situation with the Nord Stream. Here are those who are interestingly writing now about the cable. Why didn't they write about the Nord Stream? Why not write at the same time in the same materials that it has been how long? For more than 2 years? And no one, not a single state that suffered, and in whose zone this terrorist attack was committed, has provided any information to the Organization of Exchange Nations or the world community, either in the form of an investigation or in the form of some kind of factual information, has not exchanged data with Russia. No, it's not interesting, but nevertheless, sane heads, who, by the way, still remain in the West, in particular in Sweden, recognize the obvious. Let's say it now. I want to say again, I am now quoting, among other things, public figures in Sweden, journalists, publicists, and so on. They write that, given the active shipping in the Baltic, such incidents are simply inevitable due to a number of objective reasons. Moreover, after all, it does not pass the red line, it is not underlined, it is not highlighted in any materials, publications, reports of Western media. But there are literally several hundred such incidents a year. What are the reasons that cause such accidents? This is a human factor when anchoring a ship. This is a misuse of the underwater trawl. And this is a banal wear and tear of equipment. But of course, you can look for Moscow's hand in everything, but there is still, so to speak, logic, facts, and objective data. But here's what I want to say. It's just that the countries of the European Union and NATO countries need to invest billions not in the terrorist Kyiv regime, but in their scientific and technological progress. Then they will be able to avoid many problems, and there will be no need to blame anyone for everything, either Russia, China, or aliens. At the last briefing, We commented on the draft report of the UNESCO Director General on the safety of journalists. This topic has not left anyone indifferent. Russian mass media, unions of journalists of our country, have literally burst into a flurry of letters, demanding UNESCO Director General Azula to stop the practice of silencing the crimes of the Kyiv regime against domestic journalists. Appeals were received from Channel 1, Me Russia Today, NTV, Rush Today TV channel, Izvestia, a joint statement of the Union of Journalists of Russia, the Union of Journalists of Moscow. We were asked to hand over these letters, the addresses, so that Ms. Azul would be guaranteed to get acquainted with them. We guarantee that she is guaranteed to get acquainted with these materials. Journalists are calling for a demarche in front of the UNESCO leadership. During the 34th session of the Intergovernmental Council of the International Program for the Development of Communication, which begins today in Paris, the Russian media express indignation at Azul's ignoring of the targeted killings of our correspondents by the Zelensky regime, despite the fact that information about their deaths has been repeatedly, but not only published. It has been repeatedly brought to the attention of the UNESCO Secretariat officially, through official channels. I also duplicated it in the public space, so that no one could tell us later that we did not send anything to the UNESCO Director General. Domestic media operators are also outraged by the blatant abuse of statistics given in the draft report on the safety of journalists, and the problem of impunity for the period from the 22nd to the 23rd years. There is no information about the dead Russian media workers. This odious, unbalanced opus is compiled on the basis of unreliable data obtained from biased Western non-governmental organizations, as well as opaque so-called criteria, a certain methodology. And this very report becomes a source of misinformation, the very fakes that UNESCO, among other things, calls for fighting. We are in solidarity with the opinion of the domestic media. In turn, we would like to note that the unacceptable attitude of the organization's secretariat and its head to our legitimate demands undermines the intergovernmental status of UNESCO as a special institution of the United Nations. Ms. Zul's deliberate disregard of official information provided by state members violates the principles of equidistance, neutrality, which should guide the Director General and the Secretariat, in accordance with the UNESCO Charter. This is a discriminatory approach. It deals a serious blow to the credibility and efficiency of UNESCO, contradicts the values and ideals of this structure, the mechanism of humanitarian cooperation of the organizations of concern in the spheres, which has been developed for many decades, is finally being devalued. In its current form, the mentioned document is categorically unacceptable. He is a source of fakes. In a more detailed format, our complaints about the work of Ms. Azul and the Secretariat headed by her will be brought to the attention of UNESCO member states during today's meeting of the APEC. Well, once I've said about fakes, I'll also say about how to deal with them. Yesterday, as you know, on November 20th, the Second International Forum Dialogue on Fakes 2.0 took place in Moscow. It is organized by ONO Dialogue Regions, with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. More than 1,000 people from 65 countries took part in this forum. Among them are experts and specialists in fact-checking, political scientists, representatives of the media, business communities from China, Belarus, Kazakhstan, the USA, Venezuela, Azerbaijan, Switzerland, Nigeria, Australia, Turkey, Peru, Uruguay, and many others. As part of the business program of the forum, 7 rich thematic discussion sessions and roundtables were held. Topical issues of this direction were discussed in detail. This is the fight against fakes. This is rewriting history, monitoring and fixing information stuffing, compliance with digital hygiene, topics related to the development and widespread introduction of artificial intelligence technologies, as well as ways to identify and label generative content, including the type of fake, were touched upon. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs also shared its experience, and it is rich in countering disinformation and promoting the truth. We talked about the hybrid war unleashed by the collective West against our country, the state of the world majority. They talked about the methods they use, tools for censorship, blocking and removing any dissent that is possible. And they also said that we oppose such an aggressive approach. They stressed that today, more than ever, the creation of a system of honest and impartial fact-checking is in demand. This system should be based on the joint efforts of experts from relevant civil society organizations that exist outside the Western digital dictate. The organizers of the forum provided the concept. It was presented by the International Fact-Checking Association. This refers to the concept of this structure. Participants who undertake voluntary obligations under the Code of Responsible Fact-Checking. What is it? This is, well, we can say, a set of clearly prescribed rules and parameters for objective fact-checking, which will allow everyone to join forces who actually shares genuine values, supports freedom of access to objective information, and is ready to cooperate in promoting the truth. During the forum, a memorandum of intent was signed to establish an international association for fact-checking. The TASS news agency acts as a strategic partner and participant. The text of the code has already been published on the forum's website. The application form for joining the association is about to appear as expected. Links will be made in the text of the briefing in our materials on social networks. I am sure that this initiative will receive broad support from all truly responsible participants in the global information processes, first of all from the countries of the world majority, and will allow us to counter the destructive actions of the West. With our constructive agenda, the West has really played into the world order based on some one rule of its own. Our position is clear and precise. We provide an effective and constructive alternative that defends the truth and facts. Another date, November 24th, marks 105 years since the birth of the outstanding Soviet diplomat Oleg Troyanovsky. He tied his life to diplomacy, inherited an interest in foreign policy from his father Alexander Troyanovsky, the first Soviet envoy to the United States. We will definitely publish detailed material in the text of today's briefing, and we will pay attention to this in our social networks. And on November 24th, 60 years have passed since the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and the Republic of Chad. Our countries have long-standing relations of friendship and cooperation. Based on the accumulated experience of cooperation in the past years, proactive steps are being taken to ensure a more complete disclosure of the potential of Russian-member relations in modern conditions. An active political and diplomatic dialogue is maintained, including at the highest level. In January of this year, the official visit of the President of the Republic to Moscow took place. At the talks of the President of the Russian Federation, the leaders of today outlined ways to increase mutually beneficial cooperation between the two countries in various fields. In June, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country, Sergei Lavrov, paid a working visit to Nina, who had extensive contacts with the President, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chad on the bilateral agenda and international issues. On November 9th in Sochi, on the sidelines of the Ministerial Conference of the Russia-Africa Partnership Forum, a meeting was held between the Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for the Middle East and African countries, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia Mikhail Bogdanov, and the Minister Delegate to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, African Integration, International Cooperation and Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chad, signed a memorandum on political consultations between the foreign ministries of the two countries. The principal position of Russia-Chad, consonant with a number of issues of modern world politics, including support for the formation of a more just multipolar world order, the need to comply with the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. Our countries are aimed at continuing close and productive coordination in international structures, and our common priority. This is an increase in trade and economic cooperation. Additional joint steps are being taken to launch mutually beneficial business partnership projects in such promising areas as exploration and development of mineral resources, energy, and infrastructure. There are opportunities for expanding bilateral cooperation in the military and military technical fields on the basis of existing intergovernmental agreements. The field of education occupies a special place in Russian-Chat relations. In the current academic year, the number of budget places for private citizens to study at universities in our country has been increased from 207 to 300. This is one of the largest quotas of the Russian state. Scholarships, which are provided by the countries of Africa, south of the Sahara. The high level of cooperation cooperation in the humanitarian sphere is confirmed by the organization of the International Forum of Private Students, which are currently being held in Moscow at the site of the Rudan. We are convinced that through joint efforts, we will be able to ensure the further progressive development of the entire complex of mutually beneficial Russian-Chatsky relations for the benefit of the peoples of both countries and in the interests of ensuring peace and stability on the African continent. We would like to congratulate our Chatsky friends on the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the type of relations between our countries and wish the citizens of the Republic success, prosperity, and, of course, well-being. And I am ready to answer your questions. Is the International Life magazine with us?
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, good afternoon.
But the other day, the head of the Estonian Med, Martis Tsahkna, said that Europe needs to be ready to send forces to Ukraine, in order, as he put it, to reinforce any peace agreement proposed by the future US President Donald Trump. How would you comment on this statement?
You know, I see that now these very NATO countries are reinforcing the escalation with the corpses of Ukrainian citizens. That's what they're good at. Estonia, as a matter of fact, and other Baltic regimes belongs to the radical wing of the North Atlantic Bloc. They are constantly marked by aggressive, provocative, and militant statements against our country. By the way, with such a blatant nationalist overtones. Now the Estonian foreign minister, her army, I do not know what they will reinforce with 4,000 people. She incites the other members of the alliance to participate in a deliberately doomed adventure. I do not understand. Maybe they somehow do not reach them, that the appearance of contingents on the territory of Ukraine will have to mean the entry of the alliance into the war against our country. We have repeatedly told them about this. Maybe they don't read it, but this will lead to disastrous consequences, not only for Europe, but for the whole world. Now here is more about the reinforcement of the peace agreement. I want to say again that so far I support only this mentality of fighting to the last Ukrainian. After all, it is necessary to realize at some stage, if they utter the words peace agreements, peace negotiations, I do not know, peaceful contacts there, but they should also understand that it is the NATO member state that keeps the Kyiv regime from negotiating with the Russian side. At the beginning of the spring of the 22nd year, it was Britain that sent Johnson, or he sent himself, in order to dissuade the Kyiv regime and interrupt the negotiations, which was done. Then, in the fall of the 22nd year, the United States imposed Zelensky to forbid himself negotiations with our country. If they are about negotiations, then the Kyiv regime needs to unblock them, and they are still keeping Ukraine from these negotiations. Why? Because for them, Ukraine is a tool, a way to inflict, as they put it, a strategic defeat on our country. The second point, once again, this is what they are talking about now. What agreements are being talked about by those who welcome and applaud standing the use of long-range means or the permission of a number of NATO countries to use long-range means, meaning the permission of the Kyiv regime on the territory of the Russian Federation? How is it that everything grows together in the same heads? Therefore, these are irresponsible aggressive statements, provocative in fact, as indeed all the activities of the North Atlantic Alliance.
Thank you very much. One more question, if I may. How would you comment on the official opening of the US-NATO missile defense base in Polish Redzikowa, as well as the statement of Polish politicians that this facility will help in the confrontation with Russia?
As you know, this is just another openly provocative step in a series of deeply destabilizing actions of the Americans and their allies in the North Strategic Alliance in the strategic sphere. This step fits into long-term destructive practice, pulling up NATO's military infrastructure to the Russian borders. This objectively leads to undermining strategic stability and, together with other harmful measures of a military-political, military-technical nature, are aimed at projecting American power thousands of kilometers from the national territory of the United States in order to exert forceful pressure on Russia and some other nuclear powers. This naturally leads to an increase in strategic risks and, as a result, to increase the overall level of nuclear danger. And these most recent revelations of the Polish Ministry of Defense, Sikorsky mentioned by you that the Z-base, direct quote, will be able to shoot down Russian missiles, as well as other similar statements by representatives of Poland and the NATO officialdom, once again prove our long-term assessments. After all, we have repeatedly noted, pointed out, and stated that this facility has another obvious potential, among a number of other countries, to weaken the capabilities of our deterrent forces. His anti-Russian orientation is not hidden by anyone at all. The statements made further highlight this fact. They highlight or emphasize that all the previous talk about the alleged targeting of NATO's missile defense solely to counter threats emanating from outside the Euro-Atlantic. It was a propaganda screen for the ambitious attempts of the United States and its satellites to secure a decisive military strategic advantage in the confrontation with our country. Again, all similar assessments were given, and not just at the political level. Scientific and practical conferences were held. A broad discussion was offered, including scientists, public figures of this problem, in order to show the falsity of the NATO approaches. The aforementioned US-NATO long-term construction, which has been going on for almost a decade, with complete disregard for Russian security concerns, has been the subject of our most focused attention all these years, primarily from the point of view of the advanced preparation of compensating countermeasures, and taking into account the nature of the level of threats arising from such Western military facilities. The missile defense base in Poland has long been added to the list of priority targets for potential destruction, which, if necessary, can be provided with a wide range of new weapons.
Thank you very much.
So with us, Lyria News. Yes, yes, yes. Hello, yes, good afternoon. Maria Vladimirovna, we have two questions. The first question is the following. Bundestag deputy, leader of the Union Party, Sarah Wagen, said the other day that the next cabinet of ministers of Germany should seriously consider the repair and commissioning of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. How would you comment on such a proposal? But you know, the first thing, in my opinion, I saw these quotes. We will definitely give links and quotes ourselves in the text of today's briefing. But it seems to me that this is the position of any sane person on planet Earth in general. But well, it seems to me that it is still obvious that the vast majority of Germans are interested in why is it that led to a significant collapse of the German economy, namely sabotage, the undermining of the Nord Stream 1, and to terrorist attacks. Why is all this not being investigated? The second point is why all this is not being restored, and why, the third point, Germany does not receive Russian resources. The Germans are trying to ask each other all these questions, but when they ask their government, the German government, we have just seen it. Here are Scholz's statements that allegedly Russia has stopped supplying its gas. The government begins to lie to them. Therefore, this question remains at other levels. This is what their local deputies and public figures say. But I want to draw attention to one more thing. After all, Russia, including at the UN Security Council, spoke about the need for an international investigation of this terrorist attack, bringing the perpetrators to justice. The German side constantly evades this. Periodic statements by the authorities about their intention to find and punish the perpetrators for these more than 2 years remain empty words. Nothing happens. As for restarting the remaining gas pipeline pipe, the Russian side has repeatedly stated that it is technically possible to resume supplies, if the corresponding desire of the German side is expressed. Yes, thank you very much. We also have a second question. The other day, Russian ambassador to Moldova Oleg Troyanovsky gave an interview to Radio Russia and noted that the development of Moldova largely depends on cooperation with Russia, in particular on the supply of Russian gas. The next day, the Moldovan Foreign Ministry reacted to these words and said that, called them false. It seemed that this was a serious distortion of reality. Here's how Moscow can comment on this situation. For a great interview, we will also provide a link so that everyone can listen to the text of today's briefing. Read this interview in full, in accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961 year. Our ambassador spoke about bilateral relations. With love and respect to the friendly Russian, Moldovan people. I spoke on the basis of historical facts, the answer to the question of the media, and in general, speaking in the media, is not just normal, it is a mandatory practice for diplomats. Moreover, we do not prevent ambassadors and diplomats from countries accredited in Moscow from speaking in the media, and please, still use it, speak, publish articles, and so on. What kind of problems? Or is it Kishinov's understanding of democracy? We call on the authorities in Chisinau not to invent, not to compose from scratch to read this or listen to this interview, given that it was a radio interview, and stop all these insinuations. But if they like it, then we will just comment on it every time and disavow this louse with the facts in our hands. So if you have everything, let's move on. Is there news with us? Maria Vladimirovna, hello. We will have two questions. Yes, please. How does the Foreign Ministry feel about the constant presence of ex-politicians in the Western media space, who are actively rocking the anti-Russian position? Do they succeed in fulfilling the US order in fact? Do you mean former Western politicians? Yes. So they are all connected with a large number of lobbying institutions and per-agencies. And not only that, they still have such a thing as this is a revolving door policy, in which personnel appointments are determined by unsuitability, based on professional compliance, or their incompetence, but such as the personal loyalty of one or another group. Well, in particular in the USA we are seeing this. And for them, this is an absolute norm, because they are connected, as I have already said, with lobbying, and sometimes directly with deep state structures. And this is also lobbying, and the distribution of money, and per campaigns. For them, this is such a practice. Moreover, they are not experts. They do not act as objective observers. They are just monstrous, in the worst sense of the word, propagandists of some one idea, in our case saturated with Russophobia. They don't talk about the details of bilateral ties. They don't talk about the historical background. They talk about opportunities in the future. They just, banish Russophobic content with their own words. I don't want to mention these names of these figures. I think you know them very well yourself. There are others, I will not call them, more related to this category, which I have mentioned. These are the ones who come to the Russian media in the absence of an opportunity to somehow express their position in their own media. Can you imagine? That is, one entrance is literally littered with money, opportunities they are spinning from air to air in the West, and others. Others have been ordered to enter, and they also come to the Russian media in order not to simply lose their qualifications as publicists, scientists, specialists, and so on. That, as you see, everything is built differently, but it all depends on whether they are loyal to some political group, not loyal, and so on. Thank you. One more question. The EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Barrel, said that the Western world order, based on rules, hung by a thread as a result of the war unleashed by Israel. In fact, he called the actions in Gaza ethnic cleansing, blamed the attack on journalists, and announced the beginning of discussions on trade sanctions against Israel. How can you comment on this? Well, we believe that this statement is literally a recognition, yes, partial, incomplete, undisclosed, but forced by the fallacy of the European Union's policy in the Middle East in the spirit of a rules-based world order. We have repeatedly pointed out the double standards applied by the EU in assessing developments in the region, in particular in the Gaza Strip. On the one hand, they evaluate the Gaza Strip and what is happening there according to the same patterns. According to other criteria, they assess the situation in Ukraine not in the sense that the situations are different, of course not different, but a matter of methodology. She must be objective after all. They should rely on some of the same principles. And this did not happen. Under the pretext of Ukraine's right to self-defense, Brussels continues to justify any terrorist attacks, any murders, any abductions of civilians, any sexual violence against women committed by Kiev regime militants and mercenaries of the terrorist Kiev regime. Anything can, apparently, be justified by the Barrel. The fact that he is now declaring these last days is some kind of swan song that has turned into a peacock cry. We see that Western Europe is split, that in the ranks of Eurocapitals on the problems of the Middle East settlement, so to speak, assessments differ, and the role of Brussels in these issues will continue to decline. And the new head of the Euro diplomacy, Callas, as we see, seems to focus exclusively on our country. It seems to me that it is given only in order not to talk about anything else at all, except about Russia, and, of course, in such a Russophobic way, and assistance to the Palestinian people in any form will not be a priority for her, let alone a topic in general. So, let's move on. Is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, hello. Today we have two questions. Well, here's the first one. The armed forces of Ukraine launched a missile attack on the Bryansk region, while Vladimir Putin signed a decree approving the updated nuclear doctrine, and the United States announced a new package of military assistance to Ukraine. But all the factors point to the possibility of further escalation of the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And, on the other hand, a meeting of the Friends of the World Group on the Ukrainian crisis was announced. But here's what Russia expects from this meeting, from this initiative in general, and how Russia assesses the efforts of the countries of the Global South to find a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis. Well, on the first part of the question, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov commented in detail, who stated that this is a new round. At least, it is a signal of a new round of escalation on the part of the United States, which is fraught with unpredictable consequences, and urged everyone to read and read carefully point by point the fundamentals of state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence, and draw appropriate conclusions from this document. As for the peace initiatives, we are grateful to everyone, to all those states, politicians, public figures, who are actively and sincerely involved in finding a way to resolve the situation in Ukraine. We are open to negotiations, ready to consider any realistic, non-politicized initiative. Naturally, there is no question of such a xenophobic, disrespectful attitude at all, only that which is based on taking into account our interests in resolving this conflict. Once again, I want to use the key word. It is taking into account the interests of our country, the current situation on Earth, and guarantees of compliance with the relevant agreements. Well, and here's the second question a little bit. According to the results of the G20, speaking at the first meeting of the summit, Xi Jinping pointed out that it is necessary to build more bridges of cooperation and fewer small courtyards with high fences, so that more and more developing countries live better and achieve modernization. And at the same time, he outlined China's 8 actions in the field of global development. In your opinion, what signal does Xi Jinping's speech give at a time when the world is facing a choice between division and cooperation? And how would you comment on the relevance of these 8 actions of China, the Chinese leader's thesis about the need to focus on a positive agenda and establish bridges of cooperation, is in demand by the countries of the world majority more than ever? It's obvious, especially when the world is in a state of turbulence, when the world is being pushed towards some kind of catastrophes, when the world is facing unprecedented challenges. This is the idea that our joint collective efforts, in particular with the countries of the global south, are more effective than the sum of individual steps, and was recorded in the final declaration of the summit. And in this context, we share the ideas voiced by the representative of the People's Republic of China about the importance of forming a non-discriminatory international economic environment, commitment to multilateralism, the need to support developing countries, and expand access for representatives of the global south to innovative technologies. In a positive way, we note the Chinese project One Belt, One Road. We see a huge potential in its integration with the Eurasian Economic Union, including in the framework of the formation of a large Eurasian partnership. This is the flagship initiative of the president of our country, Ndu. And I just want to say that we always follow the speeches of our strategic partners with great interest. Thank you. So, is writer with us. Thank you.
Maria Vladimirovna, this is good morning. We are with you. We have one question for you today. On Tuesday, the heads of the foreign ministries of Great Britain, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland, and France said that Russia is increasing the scale of hybrid operations against NATO and new member states. I am now quoting extracts from their statement, and that these Russian operations have reached, again, an unprecedented scale, creating significant security threats. How would you, on behalf of the Russian Foreign Ministry, comment on these accusations against the Russian Federation?
It seems to me that everything is exactly the opposite. These countries unleashed a hybrid war against Russia. Naturally, not only they, but they are also using sophisticated means of economic, political, and military pressure. As you can see, there is a frenzied propaganda aimed at demonizing Russia, and it has been going on for many years. The Russian threat needs a stream of cliches. It is necessary to justify to its citizens the accelerated militarization of Europe and the next increase in exorbitant spending on defense needs, and not in the interests of its military-industrial complex, but in the interests of the US military-industrial complex. All this is being done to the detriment of solving pressing European problems and, by the way, including to the detriment of European security, the mythical Russian something else. All this is also needed by the ruling European establishment to cover up its own mistakes, sometimes criminal mistakes against its own citizens. Why does all this need to be explained? Why have the steps taken led to a crisis in the socio-economic sphere, undermined the standard of living of the population in European countries? I don't want to answer this question. Honestly, here they resort to their favorite cliches, and they are silent about the main thing. Life in Europe, in Western Europe, will not get better from the intensification of the confrontation with Russia. We believe that groundless, irresponsible confrontational rhetoric will only further unleash the spiral of escalation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Weather with us for Moscow Post. Yes, hello. We have one question today. How can you assess the results of the 2 APEC and Brazil G20 summits held in Peru from the point of view of Russia's trade and economic interests? Well, as you know, trade and economic issues have traditionally been the focus of attention of these two associations. Our delegation contributed to fixing in the final documents of both summits the thesis about the need to continue working to create a free, open, fair, non-discriminatory, transparent, inclusive, predictable trading and investment environment. It is important for Russia that these modalities of international trade imply the desire to maintain stable and predictable supply chains. The rejection of restrictive measures, a large block in both declarations, is devoted to the World Trade Organization. It is confirmed that it should remain the core of the multilateral trading system. Together with constructive partners, we managed to lay the thesis on the need to accelerate negotiations in order to restore the work of the TOW dispute resolution system. It was blocked by the states. We are talking about a key instrument of the World Organization. It is designed to ensure fair regulation of trade contradictions arising between countries. Let me remind you once again, now because of the actions of the United States of America, this body is paralyzed. This leads to an increase in protectionism of international trade by Western countries, including under the pretext of concern for the environment. Russia, together with like-minded people from the countries of the Global South and the East, is trying, well, we can say, to straighten out this role. It does this to increase its own competitiveness. I mean, it seems to me that these efforts are also aimed at ensuring that the global competitive environment is based on the laws of the market and not on the laws of force pressure and endless sanctions bludgeon. It was possible to create the necessary ballast in declarations, taking into account the interests of the aforementioned impressive group of economies. This will allow Russia to participate effectively with them in developing approaches to the future of international trade and global governance institutions. The declaration of the forum leaders also emphasized the commitment to further promote the integration of the TOW through the pursuit of the Asia-Pacific Free Trade Area. And it is important for our country that this agenda is now included it includes not only the problems of trade integration, but also the issues of trade facilitation in this regard in the region today. Together, all these achievements at the APEC and G20 meetings open up opportunities for the sale of Russian goods in the promising markets of developing economies. As for the work of the G20, I have covered in detail, the work of the G20 summit. This issue was covered in detail by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during a press conference in Rio. Thank you. Whether the tape edition is with us. Ru.
Yes, good afternoon. We have two questions for you. The first one, protests continue in Georgia after the elections, respectively, and protest leaders in positional politics often accuse Russia of interfering in his election campaign, of supporting the ruling Georgian Dream Party, Democratic Georgia. How would you comment on these statements taking place in Georgia as a whole?
These accusations are absolutely groundless, and we strongly reject them. Let me just remind you, maybe we don't know who makes such statements. We don't have diplomatic relations with Georgia. Russia is developing mainly trade, economic and humanitarian ties with this Transcaucasian side, with whose people we are united by a common history, culture, close ties, contacts between people. Yes, we really care about what happens at our borders. Yes, the people of Russia are not indifferent to how trade and financial relations are built with neighbors and sometimes even with relatives, given the closest ties that bind us. At the same time, we do not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. The West is doing this, actively doing it. At all stages of the election campaign, the West literally twisted the hands of Georgian voters, forced them to vote in the parliamentary elections on October 26th, as they formulated, "How should I?" Such wording, but does the West behave differently? For example, in the same Moldova, it's all the same. Despite the enormous pressure, the Georgian people have spoken out in favor of stability and traditional values, and even such biased institutions like the Deepchks, confirmed that the elections were well organized and took place in a competitive environment. The states and the European Union, NATO members, they don't need it. They continue to do everything to shake up the situation. They need chaos. They need to destabilize the situation in the Caucasus in any way. They need to change the authorities in Georgia. They need authorities there who will work for the West and not for Georgia and the people of Georgia. Parliamentarians of the EU member states are again attending rallies and protests in Tbilisi. Why on earth? These are internal Georgian affairs. Why should anyone dictate anything to them? An ancient people, an ancient civilization. They'll figure it out themselves. Brussels is threatening to punish Georgia with renewed vigor for the sovereign course, for the fact that people did what they thought was necessary at the elections, voted as close to them as it is clearer to them, as they wanted to do it. Moreover, this is all being done from under the Western stick, which hits the Georgian people on the head and forces them to adopt internal laws aimed at countering the course of Georgia's historical development by imposing these very liberal values, and these are anti-values, by destroying Georgia's identity. Do you even understand what is being denied? It is about the people of Georgia preserving their own identity. Now, even this is no longer possible from the point of view of the West. And when they talk about alleged Russian interference, this is exactly the situation when the cap is on fire. They do this in order to cover up their own Western crimes. I am sure that the Georgian people will not succumb to provocations even now. I am sure that the Georgians themselves will figure out who really poses a real threat to Georgia. And I am absolutely sure that after going through a very difficult history, Georgia and the Georgian people will be able to defend their identity. So the news portal is with us. Ru? Yes. Hello. Pass me by briefing rockets. What did you start talking about? Yes, well, thank you. Lee News is with us. Ru.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, Pavel Vorobyov, the portal less than Earl greater than is with you. And we have two questions for you today. The first question is this. The world media is now discussing the video handshake of French President Macron and our Minister Sergei Lavrov at the last G20 summit. And besides, the other day, German Chancellor Scholz called President Putin. That's how the foreign ministry regards such gestures of Western leaders. Isn't this some kind of sign of a change in the course of the West towards Russia?
You know, well, first of all, this formal protocol side has already been commented on by Sergei Lavrov. He himself said that it is normal practice to greet each other when people meet at general events and acquaintances in general, considering, I say again, that these are the norms of the protocol, and in general, these would be the norms of human relations, if we saw these human relations from the side of these Westerners, but hence the questions that have arisen. Therefore, if we talk not about formality, but about the essence, but it seems to me that we are constantly observing such a policy of two chairs. Remember Boris Johnson, who spoke about his love for Russia, that he adored it, quoted Russian classics, and then did everything to escalate the situation in the region of the Ukrainian conflict, so to speak. Remember other figures, Americans who said that they adore the Russian people, and every year congratulate the people of Russia on some holidays, separating the state, the country, the people, and then also supplying weapons against the same people, using neighboring peoples to fight our country, pitting fraternal peoples, and so on. As for the French president, we see such contradictory statements and actions literally every day. So I think this two-chair policy is well known. And if you have everything, then we go further. Liana Dalu is with us. Yes, hello, we are. Good afternoon. We have one question today. How do you assess the G20's call for an end to the conflict in Ukraine and the US decision to allow Ukraine to launch strikes on Russian territory? I didn't understand. The Group of 20's call for the end of the war in Ukraine. I understood that. Yes. Does this also apply to the Group of 20? No, this is separate. Yeah, so you have two different questions. Thanks for the clarification. As for the declaration that was adopted in Rio de Janeiro, as you know, it was adopted, worked out with the active participation of Russian experts, and with the direct participation of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He commented in detail on the progress of the work and our assessment. We agree with these formulations. We have approved it and welcome relevant and constructive initiatives that contribute to the establishment of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace and meet all the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, all in the interests of promoting peaceful, friendly, and good neighborly relations between peoples. I would like to draw your attention once again to the press conference of the Russian minister. According to the decision of the United States, it seems to me that we have also commented repeatedly, and today I have already told your colleague everything in response. Thank you very much. Thank you. With us is the publication author AI.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, Ruslan Pankratev, edition author I. Please tell me what is the current situation in the field of legal assistance between the Russian Federation and Western countries, in the field of mutual extradition of persons suspected of committing criminal offenses. Have there been any changes in this area since the start of the SVO, and are Western countries trying to politicize this area?
You are absolutely right. After the start of a special military operation, and after these materialized manifestations of Russophobia in Western countries, primarily in the states of the European Union, and all this has reached such a level that the law enforcement agencies of these countries are ready, even were ready to refuse to cooperate with Russia, to the detriment of the tasks of combating international crime. That's what I'm talking about. We have commented on this, but I repeat, most European countries, I mean Western Europe, have announced the curtailment, suspension, or reduction of legal aid with Russia in any criminal cases. According to the Prosecutor General's office of our country, in the 22nd year, the competent authorities of foreign states refused to satisfy 89 Russian requests for legal assistance in criminal cases. In the 21st year, there were 43 refusals, but here there are 89. 71 refusals were received to satisfy Russian extradition requests, and in the 21st year, 35. Of the total number of refusals received in the 22nd year, 42 were accepted for political reasons. In other words, they don't even hide it. In the 23rd year, 66 Russian requests for legal assistance were refused, 34 of them for political reasons. The issuance of a refusal received on 114 Russian requests, among them 38 again for political reasons. This year, 27 Russian requests for legal assistance have been refused, 7 for political reasons. 67 requests were refused extradition, 14 for political reasons, 19 for, as they wrote, other reasons. Well, apparently they are trying to disguise these political reasons. Some states ignore Russian requests altogether. For example, to date, there is no information from the United States, despite our repeated appeals, on 155 Russian requests for legal assistance, and from the UK this figure is 31. Western capitals do not fulfill the obligations of the parties established in international treaties by not extraditing criminals to the Russian Federation, by not providing the requested information on criminal cases. These countries actually act in the interests of criminal structures of the world community. There is simply no other explanation for this. Either is not even either. Another thing is that they may not want to do this, but they are guided by political motives. But the point remains that they are pouring water on the mill of the world's criminals. I would like to remind you that among the persons whose extradition was refused for political reasons, there are charges and accused of murder, of committing unlawful acts against minors, causing serious harm to the health, life-threatening to the victim, participation in the activities of terrorist organizations, and other crimes. In this regard, I would like to emphasize that the Russian Federation continues to fulfill its international obligations in the field of extradition, legal assistance in criminal cases, and law enforcement assistance. And we call on all states to carry out anti-criminal cooperation on an equal, depoliticized basis, and faithfully fulfill international obligations stipulated by the relevant treaties. The fact is that it's not because we need it, it's because everyone needs it.
Thank you. And one more question, if I may. Whether consular services are provided in Russian foreign institutions to persons in respect of whom Russia and Russian law enforcement agencies have decided to declare them on the international wanted list and take preventive measures in absentia. We mean foreign agents such as Artur Smolyaninov, Alisher Morgenstern there, and their similar relegants.
I am in a different context, but I have already stated that we do not comment on personalities, personal affairs. This is a matter of lawyers, personal data of law enforcement agencies. This is their competence. I can generally say that the current legislation does provide for certain restrictions regarding the possibility of obtaining consular services in Russian foreign countries, institutions by persons who are prosecuted. I would like to emphasize once again that I do not link this with specific mentioned or not mentioned citizens. This is not our competence. These are lawyers and so on. Here is Article 15 of the Federal Law on the Procedure for Leaving the Russian Federation. Entry into the Russian Federation establishes grounds for temporary restriction of the right of a Russian citizen to travel abroad, in particular, if he is a suspect or brought as an accused before a decision on the case, or the entry into force of a court verdict, and if he is convicted of committing a crime, then before serving, that is, the execution of punishment, or before being released from punishment, and, in such cases, the citizen refuses to issue a foreign passport, he can only be issued a certificate of return to the Russian Federation. And, in addition, the federal law on citizenship of our country does not allow the withdrawal from Russian citizenship of a citizen brought by the competent authorities of the Russian Federation as an accused in a criminal case, or in respect of which there is a court conviction that has entered into force and is subject to execution. At the same time, the initiation of a criminal case by the Russian competent authorities does not prevent the commission of notarial actions against the relevant person. For example, a certificate of power of attorney or registration of a civil status act. Well, registration of the birth of a child.
Thank you very much.
Libaku TV is with us. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna, Sabina Dadasheva, Baku TV.ru. We have one question today about the COP29. How would you assess the interim results of the work of the Russian delegation at the UNClimate Summit in Baku, including the visit to the capital of our country, in the capital of Azerbaijan, of the head of the Russian government Mikhail Mishustin, and the entire delegation of the parliament? And you know, first of all, we would like to note the excellent organization of the 29th session and the Conference of the Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change in Baku, which has been taking place since November 11th. It should be completed tomorrow. The broad representation of Russia at the event once again confirms that our country consistently stands for joining efforts in the fight against climate change. And within the framework of the format, the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, Mr. Mishustin, spoke at the Summit of World Leaders on Climate Action. He was the president of Azerbaijan and also held talks with his Azerbaijani counterpart. And we emphasize the warm welcome of our delegation by the Azerbaijani side. And I am very pleased to say that we can safely add a traditionally warm and welcoming welcome, and we are convinced that holding this event in Azerbaijan will increase Baku's authority in the international arena. Moreover, such results, successes and such a level have been demonstrated, and we aim to continue to increase cooperation in the climate sector with Azerbaijan and all interested states. Thank you. Thank you. The final question. Colleagues, time is just running out. If we do not have time to answer any questions, as you know, I will definitely answer individually. Now the last final question. If you can radio Saga.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Last week, there were dramatic events of Sukhumi in Abkhazia. What do you think is the situation in Russia today? Does Russia seem to have terrorist activity in this conflict? How are they not located in the capital of Suboga, and is there some kind of foreign style of editors, in your opinion, in this situation?
We continue to closely monitor the development of the situation in the Republic of Abkhazia. She is one of our closest allies and partners. The commentary was published on November 15th. We gave a principled assessment of the internal political crisis in this country and shared our views on possible ways out of this difficult situation. Moscow took note of the agreement between the Abkhaz authorities of the opposition, which made it possible to prevent further escalation of tension. It is important that the necessary conditions are created for holding early presidential elections in Abkhazia, which, as we understand, should be held before February 19th of the 25th year, and it is the Abkhazian people who will have to choose a head of state who could ensure the safe, stable, progressive development of the republic. We proceed from the fact that it is based on strong allied relations with Russia, which remains the guarantor of the sovereignty and independence of Abkhazia. I thank you for your attention. Until next time, well-being to you.